Hello, everyone. We're back with James and Sherwyn, and we're having the talk Hacking the Process, Business Process Compromise. And it's going to be both of them talking, so that'll be fun. Our first double speaker of the day. And James and Sherwyn would both be available afterwards in Discord. And Rodolfo is also available in Discord if we have any further questions regarding his talk. All right, I'm just going to hand it over to you guys. Thank you. Best of luck.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so hacking the process, business process compromise. This is finding and exploiting weaknesses in the business process. Who we are. We're the penetration testing team at Ziston. Ziston's a cybersecurity consulting firm based in Dallas. James and I provide penetration testing services to clients, mostly web applications, mobile applications, and external penetration tests.
So I'll go ahead and start us off. So what are we protecting? As cybersecurity professionals, it's important to really kind of define our role. Our mission is typically to protect systems from compromise. Software systems, hardware systems, data systems, that's usually our domain. And the CIS Top 18 that you can see below there kind of delineates the different realms of our job a little more precisely. And way over there at the end, at the very bottom, you can see where Sherwyn and I lie in penetration testing. However, something you may notice is missing from this top 18 is the topic of this presentation being the protection of business processes. So in an organization, there's a multitude of business processes. Many of these processes we've all been a part of, employee onboarding, going through the process of becoming an official employee of an organization, getting your name tag, your company laptop, signing a million NDAs. But there's, of course, other processes that you may not have been a part of, things like procurement, being the process of obtaining items and services, or budgetary processes, controlling where money goes in and out of an organization. Some processes may be a little more fleshed out than others, but regardless, there is a process.
Okay, so the majority of business processes today sit on technology services. Services such as software as a service, solutions like QuickBooks, KissFlow, and for sales and project management, Cello or CRM solutions. This brings what was previously financial crimes such as fraud and embezzlement into the realm of cybersecurity. If the business process sits on technology, then exploiting the business process becomes a cybersecurity issue. Although the business process still lies in the financial or HR vertical, the operation of the business process would sit in the technology vertical. The EU Agency for Cybersecurity advises that cybercriminals are more likely to improve their tactics to compromise business processes. So penetration testing and security engagements tend to focus on very specific applications, subnets, and groups of assets. Because companies are too big to do an all-encompassing pen test or red team exercise, we focus on smaller sections to help meet compliance or SDLC requirements. We don't examine the entire business process for vulnerabilities. We examine the technology they lie on. This means that business processes need to be tested because they're not built with principles such as zero trust, depth and defense, or the principle of least privilege. So we can protect the technology that these business processes sit on, and we can protect access to these technologies. We ensure that we report on vulnerabilities that the infrastructure has, such as CVEs, default passwords, or server misconfigurations. And we can find authentication vulnerabilities such as password reuse or multi-factor authentication, lack of complex passwords. But the remediation of all of this is server patching, cybersecurity awareness training, or server hardening. These things only work to a point though, because there are always 0 days that we don't know about, and users will always be susceptible to phishing and password reuse, because cybersecurity awareness training is only so effective. That means we have to assess the business process because there's always a risk of compromise. The compromise of these systems that integrate with the business process is also effective, since processes sometimes rely on external services, which although can validate the process, these external services could be a single point of failure that compromises the entire process.
So for a real world incident that happened in the not so distant past regarding business process compromise, we have the Bangladesh bank cyber heist. All the way back in 2016, a group of hackers used stolen SWIFT credentials, with SWIFT being the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. They just handle communications and transactions between big global banks, and they've been doing it since like the 70s. Anyway, these hackers stole these credentials from employees of the Bangladesh bank. And using these creds, they sent more than 36 fraudulent money transfer requests to the Fed in New York. These money transfer requests were in the millions of dollars and were instructed to transfer it to bank accounts in the Philippines and Sri Lanka. And out of all 30 requests that they sent, only 5 were actually granted, totaling in $81 million, which successfully ended up making it to accounts in the Philippines. Normally, the process in place is that there's a 24/7 printer that will print a record of whatever SWIFT transactions occur. And then in the morning, the bank employees will walk in with their coffee and confirm any transactions that happened overnight. However, the morning after the attack, the printer tray was empty. And when the workers were trying to print them out manually, an error prevented them from doing so. Eventually, after tinkering with it, they found that there was a system file that was corrupt or missing, and they couldn't get it to work. And later, it was found that this was the result of an attack by the hackers to avoid getting caught. So after about one more day of tinkering on it, the printer was eventually repaired, brought back online, and then started spewing out all the fraudulent transaction records. The bank employees looking at this spewing out started panicking, attempted to contact the Fed in New York, but this heist was purposely planned on a weekend, and no responses were able to be given until Monday, when everyone got back to work. And by this point, it was already too late.
Okay, so let's think of a theoretical exercise where we can explore the full impact of a weakness in a business process. Let's assume we have a payroll as a service company or an HR as a service company that does payroll, and this company has multiple clients across multiple provinces and countries. The initial attack vector here is inconsequential, but we can imagine it to be password spraying or an injection that creates a user account. If the attacker can exploit the onboarding process or the payroll process and create multiple fake employees across multiple companies, then the attacker could draw a salary every month for these fake employees. And the question then becomes, how much damage can the attacker do before being detected? If each fake employee is less than $2,000 a month, would the companies notice it? So these are typical payroll flow diagrams in a typical payroll process. Since none of these processes adhere to cybersecurity principles such as zero trust, if one account is compromised, the entire process is compromised. If the ability to write to the server is compromised, then the entire process is once again compromised. And at the moment, the only thing that's really monitored is the output, not each step within the payroll process.
So while the consequences of a compromised business process might be bad, you could say, the consequences could be much more dire depending on what the process is. And so for the sake of theoretical exercise number 2, we'll say the process is missile system procurement. And like the previous one, initial attack vector is still inconsequential because the real danger isn't necessarily the susceptibility to spear phishing or to weak passwords in a logistical system. Although these are important, the real danger is that business processes regarding a logistical system that handles the delivery of missile systems can be compromised and altered. If an attacker finds their way in, something as mundane as the delivery date could be changed by a day, the location to somewhere else, or the driver and freight information to something controlled by the attacker. And while the kind of people ordering missiles will likely notice that their missiles weren't delivered, by that point it's too late, and now the missiles are already in the hands of a threat actor. Go to the next slide.
Oh,
next slide. Sorry.
Okay.
So moving back to the real world, though, back in 2011, there was a spear phishing campaign targeted at the Port Authority dock workers at one of the largest ports in Europe, being the Antwerp port in Belgium. That port specifically has over 4 million shipping containers passing through that port every year. So anyway, in this incident, the hackers responsible for that spear phishing campaign were able to gain access to the logistics database, which is used to identify and locate the shipping containers. And using this, they were able to identify and locate their shipping containers, which contained drugs smuggled on board. Once the criminals knew the delivery and location details of the containers containing the drugs, they were able to send in their own truck to go pick up the container before the legitimate owner would even notice. And for 2 years, bricks of cocaine were smuggled underneath crates of bananas. The compromise was really only discovered after entire containers disappeared from the port and nobody knew why.
Okay, so what's the allure of process hacking for the hacker? The majority of hacks that make the news are ransomware attacks. That's because the point of a ransomware is for the victim to be aware of it so they can pay the ransom. But in hacking the process, the point is to become part of the process, which would make it more difficult to detect. If the attacker is undetected, then the end payout could be bigger because it retrieves money over a longer period of time. Since business process hacking is to be part of the process, the more successful a hacker is, the less chance they will be detected. So in the case of the payroll as a service company, if a company has a payroll expense every month of $500,000, they wouldn't notice a delta of less than $20,000 because payroll figures change depending on tax, overtime, working hours, and expenses. So to protect these business processes, we need to apply cybersecurity concepts to the development of the process. Principles such as zero trust would mean that the process would need validation from an outside process. Having multiple accounts being responsible for different parts could mean that the process as a whole is still secure, even if one account is compromised. And we have security standards and controls for things like Linux servers and Windows servers, but we should have them for business processes too.
So turning this back towards what Sherwyn and I do, how far should we take penetration tests? Most pen tests are focused on the tech and not necessarily the process. Most focus on a web application or an internal network or a group of external IPs. And most are going to stop once the operator gets remote code execution or a privest domain admin. And testing is usually about getting these prizes, and that typically overshadows other findings, such as compromising data integrity. Not to mention, in most pen tests, altering data is often out of scope. Another issue is that even if we were allowed to alter data, we test on the dev branch, and the processes may only be active in production environments. And thus, the security posture of the process is rarely ever addressed. And if it is, it offers a very limited perspective.
Okay, so there's always an inherent risk of business. And there's also a budgetary concern. So if the compromised business process, or finding the compromised business process, costs more than the compromise itself, the company won't pay to find it. So in the payroll as a service example, if the hacker could only steal $2,000 a month before being noticed, the company isn't going to spend $50,000 a year to find it. This means that the mitigation has to be bringing the business process into the realms of how we day-to-day do cybersecurity. Because companies are forced to act on cybersecurity threats where there's a reputational regulatory penalty, if a business process is compromised well enough, it won't be detected. This means that there is no regulatory or reputational damage. That being the case, in some circumstances, there is an incentive for companies to find these.
So ultimately, there are consequences to a business process compromise that a lot of organizations fail to consider. While losing $2,000 a month due to a process compromise is acceptable to a lot of large corporations, losing several million may not be. Or if your process is missile systems, that may not be as well.
Okay, so in conclusion, we should consider business process an asset and be treated as such within the CISAT. The company should be searched for processes like we search for assets in the first two controls of the CISAT. We should apply things like secure configuration, account management, access control management, and awareness training, and of course, finally, penetration testing. And much like a web application, when we're doing penetration testing, we should be given access and a user account and try and see how many weaknesses we can exploit in the process. And that's us done. Thanks, guys.